Hey guys, welcome to this session by Intellipaat. Have you ever had an idea for a product or service? If you did, then what kind of approach did you take when you went ahead for its development? How efficient were you when you were developing it? Or what kind of improvement did you think of when you were done with this development? These are the kinds of questions that a person or a company should ask themselves when they are developing a project. And this brings us to the topic of the day, Scrum. Now, before we get into that, guys, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our future updates. Okay guys, now let's take a quick glance at our agenda. First, we will discuss what are the different issues that Scrum helps us to resolve. And then we will see what Scrum actually is. After which we will discuss the relationship between Agile and Scrum. And then we will see the different Scrum roles and different Scrum concepts that we need to know when we're working with Scrum. And finally, we will talk about how we can implement Scrum ourselves and how it actually works. Also guys, if you're looking for end-to-end training in Agile, we do provide the same. For any further details, check out the link given in the description below. Now let us begin with the session. Now let's start off by discussing what issues does Scrum help us to resolve. So to figure out these issues, we need to go back in time. Basically, we need to discuss the older traditional methodologies that were used earlier. Now, in olden times, the market demand wasn't that high for software, and accordingly, a methodology was developed, and this was a waterfall model. Now, if you look at the phases in waterfall model, requirements, design, implementation, testing, deployment, and maintenance. You can see the reason why it took so long to develop software back then. Now, these days, the demand is different. The demand is very high. You need to be able to develop software at least every other month. Otherwise, people might move on to your competitor. Now, there are a lot of disadvantages to waterfall, and to compensate for those disadvantages, people have come up with more or better development methodologies like Agile, and Agile has many frameworks to it, and this is where Scrum comes in. Now, Scrum promotes a very short development life cycle. If you see the development life cycle of a Scrum methodology, you can see that there's a plan phase, implementation phase, testing phase, and reviewing phase. Now, all these phases can be combined as a sprint. You will have multiple sprints in which you develop multiple components of the software. Basically, if you took an example, you're building software, you would first start out by making one component of that software, and you would go through all these phases. Once you're done, you will move on to the second component. You will repeat the cycle, you'll plan it again, implement it, test it, review it, and then you will move on to the third module. And this way, you will complete your software. Now, during this time, while you're developing all the different software components, you will get review of it by your customers. You will get a better idea of what to make the next time. So this is why Scrum can be very helpful, and it helps us to resolve all the issues that the older methodologies had. Alright, now let's discuss what actually is Scrum. Now, Scrum is a framework of Agile. It's basically a software development methodology which promotes very short-term development life cycles. And these life cycles promote or prioritize the customer's feedback. Then it uses that feedback to improve upon the software that is going to be built later. Now, there are many benefits to Scrum. Let's discuss them. So one of the first benefits is that there is transparency. Every time you develop your software and you release it for your customer to review it, he will review it and then he will know what you're developing. You will not have to wait for a very long time to get a review, and your customer or your client will know what's happening with the whole development lifecycle also, so that he can give in more insight. Then the next benefit is that it's very predictable to, as in you can predict the costs and you can predict the schedule. Since you have shorter term development life cycles, you can easily predict the costs and scheduling for these periods because they're shorter, so they're very less variables, so you won't have any errors, or you'll have very less errors. Then it allows for change. Since you'll be doing it very short-term life cycles, you can easily adapt to the market or the market's needs and move on to build a better product. And finally, you can improve the quality of the product. Since you get a really comprehensive review from your customer or your client, you know what to make the next time. Alright, now let's discuss the different Scrum concepts. So one of the first concepts is product backlog. Now, product backlog is basically a list of prioritized product requirements. So for example, if you're working on a website that displays news, then displaying news is a requirement of your product or your service, that is their website. So first, you need to be clear of all the different requirements of the product there are going to be, and then you're going to list them down in a prioritized manner. Quick info guys, if you're looking for end-to-end certification or training in Agile, we do provide the same. For any further details, check out the links given in the description below. Now let us continue with the session. Now the next concept is sprint. A sprint is basically a period of time in which a particular requirement is being developed. So if we took our previous example where you're developing a website and a requirement is basically displaying news, then developing that news requirement is going to be completed in one sprint. So you're going to be having multiple sprints in which you'll be developing different components of your software or your product. Now with sprint, you have many other things also. You have sprint goal in which you have to decide what is going to be your sprint backlog here. A sprint backlog is basically all the different requirements you will need to finish developing in the given time or during the sprint. So if we took again that previous example, we have a requirement is basically being able to display news. Then you will divide that particular requirement into multiple parts and that will be counted as your sprint backlog, or that requirement where you have to develop the displaying the news will be the sprint backlog, and the goal will be to finish this particular sprint backlog. There also needs to be a definition of what is going to be done. So before you start a sprint, you need to define what the goal is. So once you've completed the goal, then you've completed the sprint. Okay, the last concept we're going to discuss is Scrum board. Now Scrum board is basically used to show all the different tasks that are being completed or that have to be completed or that have already been completed by the team. Now this Scrum board is basically used to keep the track of the project, overall project. Alright, now let's go ahead and discuss all the different roles that there are in Scrum. So the first role is the product owner. Now the product owner is basically responsible for maximizing the business value of the service or the product that has been created by the team. Now he is the person that is responsible for managing the product backlog. So if anything has to be listed in the backlog requirements, then he is the person who's going to be doing it. And in the end, he is the person responsible for increasing the efficiency of the whole process, and he is the person that has to make sure that there is maximum profit coming from the product. Then there is the Scrum Master. Now the Scrum Master will not be helping in developing the product. I mean, he will be, but not directly. So his job will be to maintain and make sure that everyone is doing their job and that everyone understands what they have to do and what exactly Scrum is. He manages the process for how information is exchanged. And finally, you have the team members. Now the team members are the people who are responsible for creating the service or creating the product by following the Scrum framework. Now these are all the roles. Now let's talk about how Scrum actually works. Now you've seen all the different roles and all the different concepts that are involved in Scrum. Now let's see how Scrum actually works. Now if you look at this diagram, you can exactly see how Scrum will work. So first, you will create the product backlog. So the product owners will decide all the different requirements for your particular product and they will then add it as a product backlog. And then the sprint planning will happen, in which basically you will plan all of your goals and assign them to all the different team members for the duration of the sprint. You're basically deciding the sprint backlog and assigning them to all the different team members. And then you will do a daily Scrum or a stand-up to check if everything is going according to plan and if we are going to make it, basically if you're going to be able to finish on time or not. And then you have the sprint review, in which you basically deliver the whole result and try to get the feedback from the stakeholders or the product owners or the customers. And then it goes to increment, where is basically your product, and you keep on incrementing with all the different products. Then you have to go to sprint retrospective. Now in the retrospective, you basically get the feedback from the customers or the product owners or the stakeholders, and then use this feedback to improve upon as a team or in the product itself for the next sprint, which goes back to sprint planning, and the whole cycle repeats where you come up with new sprint backlog during each sprint until the whole project gets put on hold or the project ends. Now to complete all of this, the Scrum team meets up daily, that is the daily Scrum, and they see what their plan is for the particular day and what they have to deliver. And if something comes up, if something else comes up, they have to adapt their progress towards their sprint goal. So guys, this is how Scrum works. And now finally, we will discuss Scrum's relation with Agile. Now a lot of people always confuse between what Scrum is and what Agile is. So let's clear that idea up. Alright, so first thing, Scrum is not a competitor of Agile. They are not in competition with each other. They're not fighting. Rather, Agile is the model which Scrum uses. As in, Agile is the model and Scrum implements it. It's basically a framework of Agile. There are other frameworks out there also, like Kanban or Lean, etc. Now, these frameworks utilize what Agile model is in their own separate ways. So if you wanted to take a better example, I would give you example of the rectangles. Now, we learned this in maths before. All squares are rectangle, but not all rectangles are squares. You have a rectangle that is a rectangle and you have a square that is also a rectangle, but all rectangles will not be square. In a similar fashion, you have Scrum and you have Agile. Now, all Scrum models or Scrum is Agile. It can be implemented. It is implemented using Agile, but Agile can be implemented without the need of Scrum, whereas Scrum needs Agile. Agile does not need Scrum. Quick info guys, if you're looking for end-to-end certification or training in Agile, we do provide the same. For any further details, check out the links given in the description below. Okay guys, this brings us to the end of the video. If you have any queries, leave them in the comments below and we will get back to you at the earliest. Thank you for watching.